Good morning. Welcome again, and on behalf of the council, we welcome you to another Great Decisions. I think this is our 5th one. As you guys know, we missed one because of weather, so the Koreas is scheduled for 30 April, same place, same time. I encourage you to turn off your cell phones, and if there's any issues with audio or stuff, always raise your hand, you know, so the speaker knows. Don't wait till the end. I've told him that sometimes, that's necessary to adjust a little bit. I want to thank the Virginia Beach Arts and Humanities Commission for a grant that makes this program possible. And on your flyers, also, there's the ballots. If you go to that website, go to our main site and just go to the Great Decisions page. You can also fill out the ballots electronically. I'm trying to save some paper here. And with that, we're going to have Dr. Regina Karp, Chair of the Great Decisions Program, introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Cindy. Good morning again to everybody. Thank you for turning out. If you were here last week, I think you got a fantastic introduction into the complexity of Middle Eastern politics. And we want to build on that this week by looking at Middle East alliances and how events in the Middle East have strained and stressed these alliances, and particularly the role of the United States in the region. And I'm very pleased to welcome today Dr. Ionut Popescu, who is a colleague from Old Dominion University, who has spent the last several years working on a book on American grand strategy, planning and improvisation. And that book is published by Johns Hopkins University Press, I think early in 2017. Dr. Popescu holds a PhD in political science from Duke University and also a grant from the Smith-Richardson Foundation. And prior to joining us at Old Dominion University, he was in the Department of Government at Regents University. With that, let me welcome Dr. Ionut Popescu, and I'm excited about learning more on Middle East alliances. Good morning to you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here and address this group. Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Regina, for that great introduction. And I do hope I will finish this book in time and it will be published in 2017. But I appreciate your introduction. As you can see, the title of my presentation has to do with American grand strategy and Middle East alliances in the Obama era, and now we're 7 years into the Obama presidency, so it is a fact that the Middle East policy is Obama's Middle East policy, even though, of course, it is impacted by what happened before. It's been long enough that we can definitely say that the Obama administration's grand strategy is reflected in Middle East politics and in the alliance structure. Just very quickly, this is an overview of what we are going to talk about today. There are 4 parts to my presentation. I will begin by giving you my take on what the Obama administration's foreign policy goals and objectives are, first globally, and then moving quickly into what they mean for the Middle East and for Middle East alliances. The third part will be an overview of some of the crises and the civil wars that have shaken the alliance system in the Middle East. And there we're going to talk a little bit about the civil wars and about the US-Iran nuclear deal, which really caused a realignment in the region. And lastly, we are going to discuss the dilemmas for the future of US-American foreign policy in the region, and particularly for the future of US alliances with a number of Middle Eastern countries and non-state actors. I will leave as much time as possible for the second half of Q&A, but definitely, as Cindy said, feel free to raise your hand if there are particular aspects of my presentation and or my Romanian accent that you do not understand. I'll be happy to say it again if you're curious where that came from. Okay, so the Obama retrenchment and restraint grand strategy. First of all, I think it's very helpful that we start at the 30,000 feet level and understand what the Obama administration is trying to do in the world and in the region before we move down towards the specific of the Middle East. Because as you will see, it is very, very important that we understand first what's the greater grand strategy before we look at Middle East strategies. And before we even do that, some of you may not be familiar yet, my book is not out just yet, with the concept of grand strategy. So what is grand strategy? There are a number of ways to define it. One of the easier, most useful ways of thinking about it is that it's a framework or a set of principles that outline a nation's both short-term and long-term foreign policy goals and the ways to achieve those goals. Some people also define grand strategy as an organizing principle for foreign policy. As you may have heard, the Obama administration, the president itself, famously said that he doesn't really need an organizing principle. In a different setting, he mentioned that his foreign policies don't do stupid stuff. Phrased it a little differently, but that was the gist of it. And nevertheless, the administration did put forward a couple of national security strategy documents, and they have a defense national planning guidance that outline their principles, and that it is quite clear that the administration does have a grand strategy, even if they have been accused of not having one, and they don't necessarily like to talk about it in those terms. And as an example, the most well-known American grand strategy was the idea of containment during the Cold War, where the organizing principle for US foreign policy was, more often than not, the idea of restraining the expansion of Soviet influence or international communism. And according to most scholars, after the Cold War, we have not quite been able to find a similarly simple, easy to understand grand strategy concept. But nevertheless, the administrations after the Cold War, including this one, have had a set of principles that guided and shaped their actions and shaped how they made certain choices in foreign policy, in war and peace, in allocating resources towards the various competing tools of power, such as military, diplomatic, economic. And here is what the Obama administration's grand strategy looks like. First, based on the experiences of the following of the Iraq War and of what the Obama team believed coming into office, is this famous pivot from the Middle East towards the Asia Pacific. And the idea was that if half of the global economy and rising percentage of that is in Asia Pacific, and if America's most important bilateral relationship with China is in that region, there is no real sense in spending so much time and energy and resources in the Middle East as the Bush administration has done, the Obama team argued, and therefore we need to shift our focus towards the Asia Pacific region. And that was the first pillar. And keep that in mind as we're going to go into the discussion of Middle East alliances, because obviously that's a very important point. The second, equally important for Obama's Middle East policy, was the commitment to end the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that is quite easy to understand, both politically and also in terms of how Obama saw the situation in Iraq and in Afghanistan coming in, that this was a major goal, the drawdown of US troops and the ending of those wars. So I won't insist too much on it right now. More importantly, for the recent conflicts was the third commitment, which was coming on the heels of the idea of ending the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, was also we're not going to start new ones. And particularly, we're not going to have another major commitment of US troops to the Middle East. And fourth, we are going to rely on diplomacy, financial sanctions, and multilateral coalitions to address global problems that may emanate out of the region or that may impact international security. And you have, of course, violent extremism, or what the previous administration used to call the global war on terror. But you also have civil wars, nuclear proliferation, and here, of course, the issue of Iran is very pertinent, and climate change. So this was kind of the plan that Obama came into office with, and more or less tried to implement it throughout his time in office. So if we move from that plan to the next topic of our conversation, Middle East alliances. What does it mean? How does it translate? And in order to do that, first we need to ask ourselves, what can alliances do for us? Why do we even have these Middle East alliances, other than the fact that they were there when the administration came into office? And I listed a number of different goals for having these alliances in the region. And there's no particular order, but first, if you're thinking about US security, homeland security, terrorism, and defense, the Middle East alliance system that the US has formed, at least in the 70s, if not before the US-Israeli alliance, that's even before that, helps the United States deter regional aggression and now fighting the Islamic State. So those are the two major military components of US-Middle East alliances, and we'll see how that plays out in the particular instances of the different bilateral and multilateral agreements. A second point, the geopolitical or strategic aspect of it. Alliances can help promote stability, prevent Iranian hegemony, and maintain US military presence in the Persian Gulf. And as you can see, the second and the third are somewhat related because, of course, one of the major reasons for maintaining US military presence in the Persian Gulf is to maintain the access to the oil markets and to the energy market. And of course, moving on to economics, we also have the trade and investment values. We're going to talk about a little bit about trade flows, and as you may know, a lot of the US Middle Eastern allies, particularly in the Persian Gulf region, purchase a large amount of US military equipment. And lastly, the idea of morality and values. Some of these alliances, not all definitely, but ideally some of them would prevent human rights abuses, refugees flow, and genocide, and also would help to support democracy, free press, and the rule of law. And of course, we are going to see that not all of them do that, but ideally, the fact that you are allied with the United States would at least make you slightly less likely to commit such atrocities. So what are the US Middle East alliances? Very quickly, you have the US-Israeli alliance, probably the strongest of the bunch. And then you have alliances with the Sunni Arab states, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and an acronym I'm going to use a lot today, GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is formed of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, and Kuwait. Then there's Turkey, which is a formal NATO ally. And then you have these two non-state actors that are very much allied with the United States right now, and the dynamics caused by these alliances are critical for understanding some of the relations with these states. And you have the Kurds, both varieties, the Kurds in Iraq and now the YPG, the Kurds in Syria, that we see them a lot of times in a way different, that they themselves don't see quite as separate, but they're fighting ISIS, and they're our main ally against ISIS at this point. And then you have the Free Syrian Army, and you can add air quotes if you want to the moderate rebels in the Syrian civil war, or what's left of them, but they've been backed by the CIA and they're supported by the United States and our European partners. Okay, before we go into the next segment, I want to just show you this map of the Sunni-Shia divide, because really, right now, what's going on in the Middle East, more so than anything else, is the sectarian conflict between the two regional blocs. And you have the Sunnis with Saudi Arabia in the lead, and of course Egypt, Jordan, and then you have Sunni governments in Yemen, and you have the Sunnis that are in the eastern part of Syria and western part of Iraq. And then you have the Shia, and you see the Shia with Iran as their leader, and now the Iraqi government is a Shia-dominated government. And it's very important that you keep this dynamic in mind. In addition to the geopolitical factor, the sectarian factor is a major driver of alliance behavior in today's Middle East. Now, there are three conflicts that I'm going to briefly address that are reshaping these alliances in the Middle East. And the first one is the Syrian civil war, and you can kind of see, basically, if you're looking at the red area still controlled by the regime and its allies. So this is the Assad and the Iranian who are supporting Assad, and of course part of the way that they're supporting is through Hezbollah troops that are on the ground fighting on his behalf, and now he's also getting the support of Russia. And then you have in green the Sunni rebels that are supported by the US, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf Cooperation Council and Turkey. You have in yellow the Kurds, as I was mentioning, the YPG, and you see kind of yellow points here and there on the map. Then you have white, which are groups associated with Al-Qaeda, most importantly Al-Nusra. So these are, if you will, the other bad guys, in addition to the large gray area of ISIS-controlled territory, the Islamic State. And this map changes a lot based on development. So as you may have heard, there is now a push by the regime to retake Aleppo, and it's also you have a push from the Kurds in the eastern part. So you see the Sunni-Shia dynamic on the one hand, and then also the complicating factors of having the Islamic State and Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, which are fighting both sides, both the Sunni and the Shia. And so you have this unfortunate three-way fight, and it is one reason why alliances are so different. And as we're gonna talk, the major problem here, as far as the United States is concerned, is that the Saudis and the Turks would like to take Assad out and then focus on the Islamic State, while the United States would rather focus on the Islamic State first and deal with Assad later. And as we're gonna see also, the Turks really don't like the Kurds. So that causes a problem because we're allied with both the Turks and the Kurds. But we're going to get back to that in a second. Let me move to Iraq just for a little while. And here, of course, the large red, the government of Iraq that's run by a Shia majority right now and is strongly supported by Iran, including by Iranian intelligence services, and these new organizations that are set up in Iraq that receive Iranian weapons. The acronym escapes me right now, but there are groups of Iraqi Shia organized as popular militias to defend the homeland, and they receive weapons from Iran, and they're basically Shia militias that are fighting the Islamic State. So if you remember from the previous map, so Islamic State territory goes here and then continues into Iraq and in the Anbar province, and I think that's Mosul, if I'm not mistaken. So, and then you have the yellow, the US supported Kurds, of course, in the north, and the gray area, ISIS. And lastly, the third theater is the Yemen civil war, where we have the government in red, which is a Sunni government supported by Saudi Arabia and the GCC, including military intervention that you're certainly aware of, in which the Saudis and their allies in the GCC helped militarily by bombing certain areas of the insurgency, that they're having an insurgency here among their Shiite population, the so-called Houthi rebels. And just like in Syria, you have this complicating factor of, in addition to the Sunni-Shiite split, you have the Al-Qaeda groups. Here in white, it's quite a powerful affiliate of Al-Qaeda, perhaps the most powerful affiliate of Al-Qaeda right now, AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which before the Islamic State became such a major threat, used to be the offshoot of Al-Qaeda that worried US intelligence community the most. This is incidentally where Anwar al-Awlaki was killed in Yemen, so you still have this major concern about Al-Qaeda. Now, in addition to these civil wars, there are two other very important things that reshape US alliances and that continue to pose a big problem. And the first is the impact of the US-Iran nuclear deal on our alliances with GCC and Israel. And very basically, the Sunni states in GCC and Israel regard Iranian regional hegemony or the potential for it as the gravest threat to the region, as opposed to the Islamic State. And therefore, in terms of long-term focus, they are more worried about Iran's influence as a major power than they are about terrorism. And they may be mistaken about that or not, but the fact of the matter is that that particular perception really caused a strain in the relations between the US and the Sunni states. And as you can see on the second bullet point, the major reason that they opposed the US-Iran nuclear deal was because it offers Iran relief from sanctions and integrates them more so in the world economy, which they worry that may further spread the Iranian support for non-state actors like Hezbollah and the Houthi rebels or the Palestinian rebel groups. So both Israel and the Sunni states are quite worried about emboldening Iran's behavior through this deal. And of course, there's also the longer term worry that the deal may only retard as opposed to eliminate the Iranian nuclear aspirations, and that's mostly an Israeli concern, but the Saudis are also worried about it, that perhaps when the deal expires, Iran will be very close to obtaining a nuclear weapon. And obviously, this group of states failed to convince the Obama administration to alter or change their mind about the deal, and they continue to be our allies, but the relations have been strained, and that's one major reason why. And the second major reason why was Obama's refusal to intervene so far in Syria in a more decisive way, and that strained relations with both the GCC and Turkey quite strongly. And here, the reason and the logic behind it is that the ongoing civil war in Syria, as the Sunnis and the Turks see it, mostly serves to strengthen Assad, particularly after Russia's intervention, and therefore to strengthen their mortal enemy Iran's position. And on top of that, they argue it fuels Islamic State recruitment and brings instability including the refugees flows and radicalization in their own countries. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, the Saudis and the Gulf Cooperation Council states would like to focus on removing Assad before being able to eliminate the Islamic State, because they argue that as long as Assad is there, any effort to eliminate the Islamic State is bound to fail. Now, Turkey has a separate set of worries that, in fact, is their top priority regarding the Kurds, and they're worried that these Kurds that we're using, and they're our best allies, and we're not using them, they're fighting the Islamic State to gain that territory, and the way the Turks see, they're not going to just give that territory back to whoever is going to be in power in Syria. They're going to keep it and basically unite functionally, if not legally, with the Kurdish territories in Iraq, which the Kurds see as a great threat, having a united Kurdish autonomous zone on their border. And if you happen to catch the news yesterday, there was a terrible terrorist incident in Ankara that the Turks blamed on Kurdish terrorists and asked the United States to separate themselves from the Kurdish groups. So these two factors, the U.S. non-intervention so far in the Syrian civil conflict in a major way, and the U.S.-Iran nuclear deal, caused this strain in the alliances with the traditional American allies in the Middle East. And moving on to the last part of the presentation, towards the future. So I'm going to give you first both views, if you will, of how the Obama administration is going about handling the strains posed by these two decisions that they have to the alliances. And then we're going to finish with a set of short-term and long-term concerns about the U.S. alliance system in the Middle East, which will lead into the conversation that we're going to have after the break. So first, there are two views of what Obama is doing. First is that his grand strategic objective of restraint and retrenchment called the realignment, and that basically U.S. is pursuing a balance of power between Sunni and Shia states, and also from a distance in order to preserve our options and also to avoid the expenses that were incurred during the previous administration. And the idea being that if you have two roughly equal blocks on each side of the divide, they can balance each other and there's no need for a heavy U.S. presence and expenditure of lives and resources in the region. And the critics, and I have there just a quote from Neil Ferguson, a Harvard history professor, who's one of Obama's top critics on this particular grand strategy issue, argued that balancing without an enforcer is almost inconceivable, and that both sides would actually have a incentive to pursue a domination in a Middle East that's lacking the strong U.S. presence that maintain security, at least for the Persian Gulf area, since the 1970s. And it's still obviously an open question, and as events will play out, we'll see which view is going to show itself to be more correct or not. But these are some of the dilemmas, and this is where I'm going to wrap up. And these are the kind of questions I would love to address with you and to have a conversation after the break. So, what are short-term dilemmas for the United States in their alliances in the Middle East? First, will the U.S. be able to manage the Syrian civil war in a way that helps first eliminate ISIS, but also that maintains our relations with the Sunni states and Turkey? And it's hard enough to just think of how to best fight ISIS. If you add this particular strain, you can see how things are indeed very, very difficult. Second, how will the U.S. partnership with the Kurds impact relations not only with Turkey, as we've said before, but also with Iraq, which is just as unhappy as Turkey would be with a Kurdish state that would basically take away close to a third of their territory. And there will be something that no matter how things end up in Syria, it will remain a big issue to see what will happen to the Kurdish territory that's now increasing in size. Third, will the deal with Iran lead to further cooperation with Iran on other issues, such as the conflict in Syria, or perhaps stabilizing Iraq and defeating ISIS? And if so, how will the Sunni world handle that new strategic realignment where the US and Iran are more often in alliance and in opposition? And will the US be able to maintain a good relation, positive relation with Iran while keeping its alliances with the Sunni and the GCC countries and Israel for that matter? So these are short-term in the sense of 1 to 3 years type concerns. What are the 10 to 15 to 20-year concerns at the grand strategic level? First, will the United States be able to keep its influence with Sunni states mostly based on, as I was saying, selling them sophisticated weapons and having military-to-military contacts, despite being at odds on some of these other major issues in the region? And related to that, will the Middle East be stable enough to allow for a more permanent American military withdrawal from the major role of security guarantor that's been played by the United States for a few decades now? Or will it be the case that the next president might have to undertake an even larger intervention to, quote-unquote, fix one or another of this issue, be it in Syria or who knows what may happen in the long term, particularly as we move to the third part, which is, will it really be sustainable for the United States to have alliances with authoritarian leaders in places like Egypt or Saudi Arabia without much regard for their own human rights records and the political and economic circumstances of their countries? Which that was one of the lessons that the Bush administration claimed to have learned from 9/11 was that trying to purchase stability at the expense of liberty, I think the president said, left you with neither. And that one of the major reasons for 9/11 and for the rise in Sunni jihadism was the bad governments of the Middle East and the oppression of their own people. So will it be the same in 15, 20 years from now? Could we rely, as we're doing now, on dictators like in Egypt, where they had the Arab Spring, but now you have General Sisi, who is just as authoritarian as Mubarak was? Could we rely on them to keep the lead, or will we have to find another way of doing it? So if you think 15, 20 years from now, that's obviously one of the major dilemma of US alliances. And I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much. We can go to the break, and I look forward to your questions after the break.